introduce Erin. Erin Heath is the Associate Director of Government Relations at AAAS, where she handles a range of political issues of interest to the scientific community. She is heavily involved in efforts to empower scientists and engineers to engage with policymakers, the media, and the public. She co-chairs the Coalition for National Science Funding, the ESEP Coalition, which is Engaging Scientists and Engineers in Policy, the steering committee for the Golden Goose Award, and she's also a governing board member for JSPG. Prior to AAAS, Erin worked at the American Institute of Biological Sciences, or AIBS, where she led the organization's media training and outreach efforts and got involved in science policy. Erin?
So I have a standard presentation where I talk a little bit about why you should care about communicating science to policymakers. And I talk a little bit about how you should communicate, but mostly I offer practical tips on how to engage in policy if you have just an hour of time, or if you have a week, or a day, or a week, or a year. So how this is different is I'm going to focus on how to engage in policy specifically during the time of COVID-19. And this talk usually takes me about 20-25 minutes, so I'm going to try to go really fast so I can stay on time. And it's not advancing. Oh, there we go. So this is our famous inverted triangle slide, just showing the two cultures of communicating sciences. And as you can see, the culture of scientists and policymakers are polar opposites when it comes to communicating, right? As scientists, we gather lots of background information and data and fill in the supporting details. And at the end of all of it, we come out with results or conclusions. But policymakers actually want the bottom line up front. And you're going to hear more about this from some of our other panelists. They want to hear the bottom line up front, and then they want to know why they should care, right? So before you can even go into any of those details, you have to tell them the bottom line, and you have to tell them, so what, why should they care? So this is a little bit different from maybe from what some scientists and engineers are used to. So when we teach science communication workshops, one of the things we teach is to have 3 key points to deliver, 3 key points in your message that serve as a foundation. So when I thought about what I wanted to say about communicating your science, now I came up with 3 C's: context, coordination, and courtesy. So I will dig into those a bit. Context. So first of all, understanding the big picture, right? What are the major issues of the day? So of course, COVID-19 continues to be a major issue. This is the reality, and there's a lot wrapped up in that, right? Testing, treatment, response. And certainly on our minds are the impacts to scientific research itself. But remember, these concerns operate within a larger context. So also critical right now, as ever, are the broader economy and jobs. And science isn't the only sector, and science policy issues are not the only issues. So that's something that we have to keep in mind when we communicate with policymakers. Also, it's important to understand what's going on in the district. Your argument is going to be far stronger, more resonant if you connect it to what's going on back home. And this is always true, even COVID or not. So for example, how is your lab or your university affected in your own district? Or is there research on COVID-19 going on in the district that a lawmaker should know about? So my third point here is have a sense of what can be done, right? What is the ask? So beyond providing information about the impacts of COVID on scientific research, which is valuable in itself, is there something you can ask a policymaker to do about it? So maybe that's sponsoring or co-sponsoring or voting for a bill, or maybe that's holding a hearing or asking a question in a hearing. Or maybe that's speaking publicly or writing about it. So think about your ask. The second C, coordinations. Find out what other organizations are doing about this. Your COVID-19 message is going to be stronger as part of a larger unified effort. So how should you coordinate? Number 1, get in touch with your university government relations office. They're great resources for both issues in science policy as well as opportunities to engage in policy. And number 2, check in with your scientific society. This is of course close to my heart, coming from AAAS. Most major scientific societies have science policy offices and or science policy activities. And many are developing new ways to engage during COVID-19. Virtual advocacy. Can you join an established virtual advocacy event? Again, scientific societies are great resources here. They offer training about both the issues and the how-tos. And I have a few examples. I will probably hold those in the interest of time, but I can provide those in the chat. And finally, social media. This has taken on increased importance in the past decade. We have data that shows the usage of social media by US members of Congress jumping dramatically over the span of just a couple of years. So it's a really good way to get your message out and get in front of policymakers, especially now while we're social distancing. One example I will throw out is the National Science Foundation just celebrated its 70th anniversary, and dozens of organizations and members of Congress helped highlight this using on Twitter, using hashtags like CNSF, NSF70, and NSF stories. Courtesy is the third one. You know, remember, policymakers are going through the same things you are. They have the same concerns about their health and the health of their loved ones. They also had to adjust to the sudden shift to working from home, and they're also worried about the future. Second, science. Science is not entitled to funding, right? We have to make the case about why it's important. This continues to be true now during the pandemic. And finally, all of the usual rules of advocacy apply, like be polite, be on time, and listen to other points of view. Now I'm going to talk about ways to engage in policy in a virtual world. I have several suggestions here. The first one is to sign up for newsletters. There are several of these out there where you can learn more about science policy issues and opportunities. One is by AAAS, it's our policy alert, and this is open to any AAAS member. If you're a student member, you can go onto the website and opt in. It's a weekly newsletter that talks about the issues of the day. There's also, we have our journal, Science with a capital S, a great policy blog called Science Insider. And again, check in with your scientific society. A lot of them have wonderful resources on learning the issues. There are also a gajillion webinars out there, especially now. I'll talk about one of my coalitions, ESEP, a little later. We have a whole collection of webinars recorded over the years on how to engage in science policy. And again, social media campaigns, you know, one really quick and easy way to get involved and see what's out there is to follow me and all of the other panelists and see who they follow and see what they're talking about. Attending a virtual meeting online of a government agency. So government agencies have advisory committees or boards that hold public meetings regularly. They're still doing this, but virtually. So for example, the National Science Board, which is the policy board of NSF, they recently just had their first full virtual meeting. So it's a great way to learn about what's going on in the federal research agencies. I already mentioned virtual advocacy days. These are opportunities to get together with individuals who share your policy interests, to advocate for science or graduate education or whatever inspires you. And they involve some element of training. And sometimes the organization will even schedule the meetings with policymakers for you. So that's really handy. One example is coming up in actually next month, one that we at AAAS participate in is called the Rally for Medical Research. That's gone virtual this year. Public comments. So beyond Capitol Hill, federal research agencies are constantly asking scientists and other stakeholders for input through requests for information or requests for public comment. These are featured on regulations.gov. But I think a better way to watch for them is science policy newsletters. Again, they usually will point out opportunities to weigh in. And even during COVID, work is still happening on a variety of science policy topics. For example, within the past couple of months, several NIH institutes and centers have opened up public comments on their multi-year strategic plans. Connect with organizations. This is a big one, I think. There are several, I think, organizations that would be of interest to you all. The first one I mentioned, ESEP, Engaging Scientists and Engineers in Policy. This is a coalition that I co-chair, and we focus on empowering scientists and engineers to engage at all levels of government. There are so many different options out there for you, and we try to list them on our website. So that website is science-engage.org. I can also add that to the chat. So I recommend that to you. Also, a lot of you are already members of the National Science Policy Network. This is a national network of student science policy and advocacy groups. We're happy to be longtime partners of them. ESEL on the right is Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. That's an organization begun and led by a former AAAS policy fellow. This group's doing amazing work on local engagement. The newsletter alone is worth knowing about this group because you can read about scientists engaging in policy in their hometown. The Federation of American Scientists, they've been doing a lot of interactive work, including an online Ask a Scientist initiative on COVID-19. That's, again, the Federation of American Scientists. And then UCS, Melissa's on the call. Union of Concerned Scientists is a science network of more than 25,000 scientists and engineers who are focused on advocacy. So these are a lot of great opportunities out there. Another one, I'll go back to this slide, writing about an issue. I have to talk about JSPG here. Full disclosure, I chair the governing board. I'm really proud to do it because it's an excellent opportunity for grad students and postdocs and early career researchers to write about policy. So that's an interdisciplinary peer-reviewed journal that focuses on science and tech policy, both domestic and international. Network virtually, there are a lot of opportunities to do this, including that we have virtual science policy happy hours once a month. That ESEP started this in DC several years ago. Actually, we'll sort of continued it, and then it spread throughout the country. And now ESEP and NSPN are partnering to do virtual versions of this. They've been really successful, and I definitely recommend. The next one will be, I don't think we've declared the date yet. But there's one coming up later this month and then one again in September. And I usually post them to my Twitter, Public Heath. So if you want to see the details, that's a good way. And finally, of course, register to vote, right? Register for mail-in and absentee voting. I don't need to tell you how important it is to vote. So just make sure that you have your ducks in a row and make your voice heard. So I'm trying to go really fast here to stay on time. I want to talk a little bit just about what we've been seeing and hearing so far during COVID in terms of advocacy. Now this has been new for all of us. Many science organizations have had to cancel meetings at the last minute or move in-person efforts to virtual efforts. And this resulted in an experiment in virtual advocacy, and it's certainly not the way anyone would have wanted to do it. But the good news is early reports suggest that these virtual advocacy efforts are succeeding in terms of, meetings are happening, phone calls with congressional offices are happening. Sometimes they're on video, sometimes they're not. Sometimes people are actually having an easier time reaching the members of Congress themselves. Also, this is really important, participation is available to new people, right? People who can't travel to DC are able to do federal level virtual advocacy events. So that's a real opportunity. We also think there's real potential at the state and local level. Not only are federal legislators spending more time in their districts, but state and local lawmakers are they are in continual need of scientific expertise. And this hasn't changed. And AAAS has a few programs that operate on this level, and one that I'll draw your attention to is called the Local Science Engagement Network. It's a program we're piloting in a few states, and we're planning to expand it. And remember, August is a time when members of Congress tend to go home. Finally, I wanted to draw your attention to a relatively recent new resource developed by a team of scientists led by American University. I was part of that team. It's a booklet called Evidence-Based Communication with Policymakers. And these are tips developed from our research on both lawmakers and scientific organizations. I recommend you check this out. The URL is right there, and I can also paste it in the chat. And finally, this is me. If you have any questions beyond this session, please feel free to get in touch. That's my email. As I said, I'm also on Twitter. And I look forward to the rest of the session. Thanks so much.
So just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you one question right now, and then we can do more later. So you mentioned that storytelling is really important for advocacy, and we'll be talking about this more as we go forward. Can you give a little context as to why that's really critical for advocacy?
Yes, thank you. I love that question. So storytelling is something we try to do in science advocacy, and it's because lawmakers are people too, and the stories are things that they remember. Stories can touch their heart. Stories are things that they can easily repeat and share, and they illustrate an issue better than, I think, facts are incredibly important, but so are stories. So one example I want to give of a way that we've tried to do that I think has been really successful is something called the Golden Goose Award. And this started in 2012. This is an award that honors federally funded research that has an unexpected impact on society. So sometimes there are questions about why should the government invest in research? And this is a way of showing why. It's a way of showing how if you invest in fundamental curiosity-driven research, you don't know where it will go, and sometimes it will change the world. And this award was actually, the idea came from a member of Congress, Jim Cooper, Tennessee. He approached my organization and several others and said, can you help me do this? And we said yes. And I think I said already, we launched it in 2012, and now we have an annual award honoring the unexpected impacts of research. And now we have this treasure trove of stories that we can share with lawmakers and others. So that's on our website, goldengooseaward.org. We also, this is really important, we have a number of members of Congress who support this effort, a bipartisan group, and they come every year and speak at the award ceremony. So do federal agency leaders. So it's become a really great way to come together and talk about the importance of research.